Hello there, my name is Elliot Wonenyika from the Child Accountants Academy, and welcome to this Test 1 MAF revision. So this is a revision focusing on the paper that we wrote in March of 2019, and I would want to emphasize the importance of reflecting what you did well and what you did wrong as part of your Test 1, which should be able to identify the key learning points before you start to prepare for the next assessment. So Test 1 for most of you was the first time you are writing a CTA examination, and you are not, and I believe most of you are not really clear on what to expect. Now that we've done this paper, let's discuss what was our expectations in you answering Test 1. So my revision, I'm going to focus on required A, which carried the most weight in terms of the number of marks. So it had 40 marks out of the total available 100 marks in this paper. So it means for those who were able to do very well in this question, chances are high that you ultimately passed your Test 1. And for those who struggled with this paper, chances are high that you also didn't make it through. So my strategy is going to be as follows. I'm going to read through the required, then focus on interpreting the required, then from there come up with a structure or layout on how we expected you to be able to answer this question. Then from there, identify a few solution points and our expectations of how we wanted you to be able to weight those particular points. So required said, discuss the strategic position of Newton and advise on the strategic action that Newton can take for the future of the company, 39 marks. And there were also communication marks of a 1 mark communication mark. So the question is, when you look at this required, we need to interpret the key words coming through in this required. So the first thing here is discuss. And normally when I look at a discussion, what we are asking you to do is, can you please present a logical argument? But the question is, what am I talking about? So you expected to discuss the strategic position. So the question is, strategic position, what is it? It's all about where are we now? So we are looking at the current status quo. What is the current strategic position of Newton? That's first part of the required. And then also said advise. So here you need to also take out the concept of the word advice. So when you're giving someone advice, you need to be clear on what you want them to do and how you expected them to be able to do it. But what are we advising them? On the strategic actions. So the question is, what is driving these strategic actions? So if you look at the context of this required, your strategic actions were being driven by the strategic position of where Newton was currently. So it meant that in your solution, for you to be able to come up with the valid strategic actions, they need to be able to be connected back to the current strategic position that Newton was. So now that we are clear about the requirements, the question now is, how best then should I come up with my solution or structure my solution? So strategic position. So I'm sure as part of your block 1 classes, we discussed a number of tools that can be used by entities to define or to identify the strategic position. All of you talked about SWOT analysis, which was fine. Then we also have PESTEL as a tool that can be used to discuss an entity's strategic position. And then some of you also used Porter's 5 forces model. Forces model. Now the question would be, should I be using all these tools? And from the exam or from the script that we mark, we know that most of you went the route of applying all the models, which then resulted in the risk of repetition. I'll give an example. If you look at the SWOT analysis and you look at the threats, so from the information provided, are there any threats in respect of Newton's current strategic position? So from a threat, and then when you go to political, so to PESTEL. So PESTEL, P stands for political, E economic. So the economic environment can be posing certain threats to Newton's business. So if you write a thread under SWOT, then repeat that same thread under pastel. It's repetition, no additional marks. So my emphasis here is at times you need to identify based on the information provided which tool should I mainly focus on. The other one is just now doing a completeness check to say, okay, did I consider maybe under threats the legal environment? Is it creating any opportunities? Is it creating any threats? The technological environment, is it creating any opportunities or is it creating any threats? The same also applies when you go to Porter's 5 forces model. Risky again is to repeat the same point that you would have raised under your SWOT analysis. So the most important thing here was to do what? To be able to say, if I'm using the SWOT analysis, okay, I identify the points that allow me to analyze Newton's strategic position. Then if I want to use pastel, my advice there is don't then quickly go through the whole pastel way. You're just now asking yourself, have I looked at the political environment in my SWOT analysis? Have I looked at the economic environment in my SWOT analysis? Have I looked at the technological environment in my SWOT analysis? Have I looked at the social environment in my SWOT analysis as an example? So that was the first part. Then you are asked to come up with actions. So what's driving the action? So the actions are being driven by the issues you have raised in your pastel SWOT analysis or Porter's 5 models when you are doing your strategic position. So I'll give you a classical example. Most of you are able to pick out that Newton was facing competition from cheap imported second-hand clothes. So as a strategic action, what should Newton do? So some could say Newton should lobby the government to put more stringent measures on the importation of second-hand clothing. So you can see that my action is now directly linked to the positional analysis I would have done. But more often than not, we just came up with generic strategic actions to saying Newton should focus on product differentiation, they should go market penetration. But what exactly are we doing? How is it linking to the positional analysis? So I'll revert back a bit to the strategic position analysis where most of your marks were residing. So all of you, or the majority of you, use the SWOT analysis. But the question was, when you're looking at a strength, did you properly weight a strength? So what is a strength? So we are saying, looking at Newton, what are they currently good at, and what advantage is it giving them as a business? So that's what we are calling a strength. Then we go to a weakness. Looking at what Newton is currently doing, is it disadvantaging them in any way? So when you then look at threat, so most of you are then confusing between a weakness and a threat. So weakness is what you are currently doing. How is it disadvantaging us? Threat is more forward-looking. Going forward, if there are certain conditions, how may they negatively impact us? And normally we find that threats arise from the external environment, as well as opportunities. They are arising from conditions that are existing from Newton's external environment. So let's demonstrate some of this. So I'm going to go through the case study. So in the case study, you were told Newton Stores is Zimbabwe's largest non-food retailer, and Newton has been in operation for more than 80 years and has expanded its footprint in the Zimbabwean retail market to 100 stores as of 31 December 2018. I would believe the majority of you picked the trigger that 80 years is a good thing. Newton has been in business for the past 80 years. So how do you write this as a strength? So the fact that Newton has been in business for 80 years, what advantage does that give them? So I would write my point as follows. Newton has been in business for 80 years, which means that they have in-depth understanding of the non-food retail market experience. Or someone could say, given that Newton has been in existence for 80 years, it means they've been able to stand the test of time. This means they are a well-known brand. So the advantage that is arising from the fact that they've been in existence for 80 years, well-known brand, knowledge of the non-food retail. So just writing that Newton has been in existence in 80 years, full stop, that's not a strength. You've just given us a trigger. Or another trigger that you used was the fact that Newton had 100 stores. So what advantage does that give Newton? It means Newton has got a wide distribution network, which means they are able to reach a big number of customers. Makes sense? Newton operating in other African countries. So the fact that they are operating in other African countries, what advantage is that giving Newton? The advantage is Newton is diversified from the Zimbabwe country risk. So I'm sure from what you are seeing here is I'm picking a trigger plus the advantage that is arising from that trigger, which then gives me a properly weighted strength. Let's look for a trigger which talks about any weakness that may be arising. So I'll go through my scenario. Okay, I'm told as an example, operating information around operating environment, the Zimbabwe economic conditions, fuel shortages. So I find when you look at these disposable incomes, is it something that is within Newton's control or it's an external? So deterioration of disposable income, it has got nothing, it's not Newton's fault. So it can only give rise to a threat. But this trigger, what threat does it give? The fact that consumers are suffering deteriorated income. What threat? The threat is going forward there may be reduced demand for our products. So I picked the threat, the trigger, deteriorating disposable income. So threat going forward, what could go wrong? Reduced demand for our products. I'll move on with our scenario. Okay. So in this scenario, we have been told that the Zimbabwe returnees have been facing competition from traditional players and the proliferation of informal traders who sell merchandise from their cars, satchels, etc. So traditional players trigger. So that means we've got a weakness as Newton or it's a threat. So traditional players, these external factors. So what does that mean to me? It creates a threat to me as a business. So this is another classical example whereby if for those who then went on to use, let's say Porter's 5 forces model, there was again a risk of repetition here. You'd raise this as a threat. Then when you go to Porter's 5 forces model, you then raise it again when you analyze industry competition. That's duplication or repetition. We are not going to get 2 marks for doing that. You only get 1. Okay. Then you're also told the CEO of Newton, Mr. Townsend, received an award for being the best business executive of the year. So that's a trigger or an indicator. So what advantage does this mean? It means from a strength perspective, someone could say these guys have got an effective leadership team. Or the fact that we received an award also means that we got brand equity, or it's testimony of the experience or good team that Newton possesses. So strength. So I'll conclude on the SWOT analysis. So the most important thing here was identify the trigger from the scenario, explain if it's a strength, explain the advantage. If it's a weakness, explain the disadvantage. If it's an opportunity going forward, the trigger, what advantage are we going to get going forward? If it's a threat, trigger and disadvantage that we're going to experience going forward. Okay, so now that we have looked at the strategic position, the big question was where most of you really encountered huge challenges was now on the actions. So we did the strategic position analysis, but then when we went to the actions, we totally forgot about the strategic position analysis that we had done, which meant that our actions were totally divorced from the Newton's current strategic position. And that's why we then ended up coming up with this generic comment to say Newton should follow a market development strategy. But specifically, what do you want them to do? So as an example, you identify that as a threat in Zimbabwe, the economic environment is not that well. So strategic action, what should we do? I would say Newton should focus on expanding its footprint within the regional markets, that is outside Zimbabwe. Why? We are responding to the Zimbabwe country risk. Or we are also having issue of Newton facing competition from those selling second-hand products. As an action, what should Newton do? Lobby the government to put import duties on those, or to put more stringent border controls. Or currently we are told that as disposable incomes are falling, consumers are now focusing on basic commodities. But at the moment, Newton is a non-food retailer. And you find the market that we are operating in, it means it's more of like a luxury. People can make do with the clothing that they have maybe for the next 1-2 years. But if you go into the food sector, it's a basic commodity. It's always going to be needed. So strategic action, Newton could consider going into the food retail market. Sometimes what we can see here is I'm now linking my strategic actions back to the strategic positional analysis. And this further emphasizes that your examinations are not intended to be theory dumping. You are applying. You have done strategic positional analysis using the triggers in the case study. Now with the knowledge of strategic position, can you tell us what do we need to going forward? So in conclusion, I would say most of us suffered from what we normally call model paralysis. You know, you studied the ants of matrix, you studied the GEC model. So most of you then just dumped the ants of matrix. We dumped the GEC model. But did we come up with specific actions responding to the issues you identified in your positional analysis? So the models are only there to assist in giving you guidance, but they should not paralyze your thinking. I hope this was a very important learning point in terms of what we expected to do from an application perspective, making use of the information in the case study, connecting the dots or interrelationship between the same required. And I would want to emphasize the importance of this topic again. You will find as you go into block 2, block 3, we're going to do a lot of work around quantitative analysis, relevant costing, capital budgeting or investment appraisals, valuations, etc. And in those topics, you are going to start off with using quantitative analysis tools. But in most of the questions you're going to get, they are going to ask you to also discuss other factors to consider. And you're going to realize that the tool that we use when you did strategy are very useful in coming up with other factors to consider, let's say before making an investment decision, or we have made the valuation of a company. What else do we need to consider as part of the valuation exercise? So I hope that this revision has been eye-opening and assisted you in clarifying, if especially if you struggle with this question, what you should have done and what should also do going forward. Thank you very much for taking time to listen to this recording. Hope you are going to be able to implement the suggestions that I've made in your future and upcoming examinations. Goodbye.